Welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast, the show where Papa Thom spreads wisdom like a smear of cream cheese on an everything bagel. Here's your host, Thom Jennings.
Hello and welcome to the third episode. Wow, it's amazing. Time goes by fast. Of the Bagel Logic Podcast. And of course, I want to thank everybody for continuing to listen, continuing to support the podcast. Got some great topics coming up. This week, our topic is how to lose a local election. And I think that there'll be some things here that are it's kind of a microcosm of what we've seen on the national level in the last few years. And I won't, I will say that I ran for office 3 times. My wife ran for office once. And for you to really kind of understand the background on this, I'll just let you know about the community that we came from. I mean, we still live in the Western New York area near Buffalo and Rochester, New York. But the town we were in was a town called Albion, New York, and the county was Orleans County. And Orleans County population is around 40,000 people, give or take. A major prison is there. I guess the big claim to fame in Albion was the famous prisoner was Amy Fisher, the Long Island Lolita. But really, the economy is not necessarily based on the fact that they have a prison there. It's a lot of people used to commute from Albion to Buffalo or Rochester to work, and I think probably still do. There's not a ton of major employers out there, and it really is a rural community. So even though it's north and it's near Niagara Falls and it's not like we're anywhere near the south, I think that it kind of has that more of that rural kind of homey feel to it. And in terms of politics, most rural communities tend to lean one way. We know which way that is. It's Republican. And I grew up in Rochester, New York, which was the suburb of Brighton, which is right near Rochester, New York, which was a more of an urban / suburban area. I grew up in a suburb, but honestly spent most of my time in the city. And so in a community that was very diverse. So I grew up as a Democrat. My dad was a New Deal Democrat. So when I relocated to Albion, it was a bit of a culture shock. Because, I was used to being around more kind of like-minded people politically. And rural communities it's unique because they're such great places to be if you personally are having any kind of issue. If there's a family member that has an illness or you need a fundraiser or somebody dies, any of those types of things. Rural communities really, really come together and support each other. So there is that kind of common identity. So that's the plus side. The negative side was in deciding to run for office, I really had very little chance of winning as a Democrat because the numbers just weren't in my favor. And, on the local level, it's interesting. I know that we all kind of think that, well, parties shouldn't matter on the local level, but they do. I mean, people do look at that. I used to hear when I was out campaigning, people would always say to me, and I ran for a county legislator position, and people would always say to me, well, it doesn't matter what the party is. It matters about the person. And while people say that, there is a core group of people that will only vote for members of a certain party. There's actually people that I spoke with, a great number of people, and people that I consider incredibly intelligent and educated that believed they could only vote for the party that they were registered for. There were people that say, oh, I'd love to vote for you, but I'm registered as a Republican. Now, I know that you may think, oh, well, maybe they're just confused because they're talking about a primary. No, they were talking about the general election. They genuinely believed that they could only vote for a particular person if that person was part of the political party that they were registered for. But the way I got into politics, it's kind of fascinating. I was writing a weekly column, and I've already told you a little bit about the kind of the demographics and everything. And I tried to make it something that was a bit tongue-in-cheek. And when I first started writing for newspapers, I was a little older. I didn't go to college till I was in my mid-30s. And it was an op-ed column. And I would say that there were times that I tried to be clever, in kind of that Dave Barry, or even a little bit of that Irma Bombeck sarcasm. And if you're not familiar with either one of those people, look them up. It's worth it. But the point being is that my attitude is that an op-ed in a newspaper, the purpose that it served was to provoke thought. And sometimes it could be funny, and sometimes it could be sarcastic. But the intent was never really to just kick a bear or stir up a hornet's nest, however you want to put it. But oftentimes that's exactly what happened. And the way I got into politics, it's interesting because it was through a column that I wrote, and I was writing this weekly column. And at the time, Kim Jong-il was the premier of North Korea, and he was, as typically, things don't change even, this is 15 years ago, he was doing nuclear weapons tests, and of course the United States government didn't know how to react. And I said, well, if you really want to get rid of the nuclear weapons in North Korea, all you got to do is send in a local code enforcer, because they'll just harass them with letters and annoy them to the point where they'll just remove them. And when I wrote it really as something that was just meant to be kind of tongue-in-cheek, because I had some friends that were dealing with some code enforcement issues, and in a local town, small towns, at least out here, I don't know how it is across the rest of the country, code enforcers wield a great deal of power, and there's all kinds of things that you may or may not realize are a code violation. So, for instance, in our case, my son had purchased a vehicle. He was 16, maybe 17, and it didn't have a license plate on it. So we get this letter in the mail. It says, oh, you can't have a car without a license plate in your driveway. It's funny. We hear about all these people complaining today, during this pandemic. And as I'm recording this, it's year 2022. Or is it 2021? I don't know. It's the years just go by so fast. Yeah, it's 2022. And so we were getting all these letters in the mail about, you can't have a car, and you're thinking, oh wow, this is kind of crazy. Like, it's my driveway. Why can't I just have a vehicle in the driveway without a license plate on it? And as I said, people are complaining these days during the pandemic. Is like, oh, I have to be required to wear a mask, or I gotta get a shot, or I gotta do this, I gotta do that. And to me, it just felt like such a kind of a creepy infringement. But I guess I got it. And honestly, the guy, it worked out. What he wound up doing is he actually told us, just put a cover on the car and we won't cite you. And I said, okay, well, that's cool. But I had this all in mind when I wrote the column, and I didn't mean it to tick the guy off, but it did. So, eventually the column runs. I wound up getting like code violations in my mailbox nearly every day. Now, it's 15 years removed, so I don't know if I'm exaggerating, but I will tell you, the one I remember the most was they sent me this letter, and it said that I had my garbage out on the front of my house, and it didn't have a tight lid on the garbage can. So then I drove down the street, and nobody had a lid on their garbage can. So clearly he just was harassing me. And we hated each other for quite some time over this. But eventually we wound up serving on some local board. And this is kind of how small towns work. I mean, people wind up having to work together on things, and we wound up being pretty good friends. I mean, at least we were friendly. I mean, I can say I have a good opinion of him now, and we can chat by phone or any of those kinds of stuff. But it was just so funny that whole interaction had. But what it wound up doing is it wound up kind of stoking my interest in maybe getting involved in local politics. And The next thing I wrote about was I had a column about a proposed county jail, and again, it was one of those columns, very tongue-in-cheek. I broke down the cost per day to house an inmate in the county jail and compared it to staying at a 5-star hotel. And was like, well, geez, so now they want to build a new jail for millions of dollars, and, why don't we just build a new hotel and put them in the hotel because it would actually be cheaper, and we're talking about county jail and, whatnot. Now, the backstory is I had a little bit of a personal vendetta because my ex-wife at the time worked at the county jail, so anything having to do with the county jail, I automatically had a negative opinion of. So a little bit of it was driven by that. But it was, to me, again, it was just kind of a pithy, tongue-in-cheek lament, like, oh, we're going to spend all this money and our taxes are going to have to go up because we have to build a county jail. And ironically, here it is. This was back in, as I said, actually, man, it's probably closer to 20 years. I think this was 2002, 2003. And they were saying that the prison population or the county jail population was it was too high, and they were paying to house prisoners other places and whatnot, and the population was like 100 and some odd prisoners. And now they have this in New York State. They have what's called bail reform, so there's hardly anybody in that county jail anyway. So if we'd built it, it would have truly been a waste of money. Now the lesson there is that I was really very much a Nostradamus type. I foresaw that was going to happen. No, I really didn't. But anyhow, that article about the county jail wound up irritating the guy that was the county executive. His exact title out here was a chief administrative officer, and he ran into me. He had something to do with she wasn't my daughter-in-law at the time, but it was my son's girlfriend's family. Was real good friends with this guy, so he wants my future daughter-in-law's graduation party, and he corners me and just rips me a new backside over this particular column. And I was like, dang, this dude's taking this personally. So, but then on the other end, there was a guy who was the son of a local Democratic chairperson who saw the article and said, hey, you sounds like you're a citizen who really has an opinion on things. So, you should run for political office. Words that I still remember, and going back, I should have at that time said, no, I definitely should not run for political office. I should run is what I should do. I should run the other direction and not do it. But it's one of those things. It really does kind of appeal to a certain type of person's ego, myself included. It's really cool. They talk about how, like, if you're going to be a celebrity, you see your name in lights on a marquee or whatever. And seeing my name on a bunch of lawn signs scattered throughout even just a small county was really cool. I mean, I really love that part of it. And there were other aspects of it that I enjoyed as well. Part of running for local office as opposed to maybe national offices, you do this whole door-to-door thing. And I really loved I was telling somebody the other day that I'm people curious. I mean, I really am. I love meeting new people. I love talking to them. I love hearing their stories. And as much as I love to just kind of ramble and tell my side of an issue or whatever, I mean, I enjoy the other side too. I enjoy conversations because I just find them fascinating. It's where I learn the most, or maybe it validates my feelings on certain things or gives me a new perspective on others. So the door-to-door thing was actually, it was pretty cool when I wasn't getting attacked by like dogs, which if you run for office, bring something to spray the dogs because they bite, and they're not. That's not good. But if there was one thing I learned about doing door to door, I remember the first time that I ran for office. As I mentioned before, I ran 3 times, and it was 2 years, 2-year terms. So I ran 3 times over the span of 4 years. And it's covering a fairly small area. I mean, the district that I was running in as part of the county, I think it was I don't know, by the time all the votes were counted, there was about 14 or 1,500 people total. And the total population, so was probably, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 maximum in the district that I was running in. But I would go, the first year I went, I'd literally just walk out there. I was like a horrible vacuum cleaner salesman. I just knock on any door and just hope that somebody was there. And the one thing that I forgot to check is if they were actually registered to vote, because and the reason I eventually started doing that is because the first year I would go out every weekend, and inevitably I'd hit a house where I would just get frozen, like whoever the guy was. I mean, I've got a friend that I joke about has what I call a Medusa mode, where they engage you in a conversation and you're just kind of stuck there, like you can't get out of it. I mean, if you begin a conversation with this person, you are going to be frozen in place for 45 minutes. It's just going to happen. So if you don't want that to happen, you avoid it. And I don't know, maybe people say that about me. I'm sure people say that if you're trying to get out of someplace quickly, you don't pop over and say a quick hello to Tom, because he's gonna talk your ear off. Which, yeah, I will. So as I'm doing to you right now through this microphone. But this one guy, I get stuck at the door and he's just going on, and he's talking about all these different issues and everything like that. And I was there for like an hour and 40 minutes. And this guy, he just reeked of cheap beer. He was just going, but I mean, he just had an opinion about everything. And so I was trying to kind of work with him in terms of educating him on what the role of a county legislator was, because he was talking about things, like gun control and abortion and all that stuff. I'm like, nah, that's not really stuff that I'm going to be dealing with as a county legislator. But and then by the end of it, he's like, man, you're a great guy. You absolutely have my support. You're wonderful. And I was like, well, that's cool. So, hour and 40 minutes wasn't completely wasted, but it was, because the guy wasn't even registered to vote. And it's funny, you think, oh, well, if you're an altruistic politician and you're running for office, you shouldn't worry about whether the person is registered to vote. You're serving all of the people. At the end of the day, if you're going to run for office to win, then you need to talk to people that can actually cast a vote. And so the next time that I went out door to door, I had a pre-qualified list. And actually, I wound up reading all these books and all these strategic books. And by the time I got to the third election, I had a list of people that had voted in the previous two elections, what party that they were registered for. And I targeted mostly independents and Democrats. I didn't even bother going to Republicans' houses, because many of the books that I read said, don't stir up your opposition. These people probably aren't going to vote for you anyway. So why even attempt to appeal to the opposite party if it's a waste of time? And if they don't see you, because what's going to happen is, if you go to the house of a friend of your opponent, the first thing they're going to do is call the opponent, and they're going to tell everybody, hey man, this guy's out campaigning really hard, so we better get out and vote. And honestly, I came very close to winning the third time, and I think that was part of it, especially with the numbers being stacked against me as they were. So a very valuable lesson. But it kind of goes back to the whole notion of where we're at as a nation politically. We're so polarized that we just think that, there's that one side of politics where people say, hey man, you got to take care of your party. So if you're a Republican, you got to do what the Republicans tell you to do. And if you're a Democrat, you got to do what the Democrats tell you to do. And if you don't, you're a traitor to your party. And I mean, honestly, that's the kind of thinking that drives me crazy, because really, I mean, if you're an elected official, you're supposed to be representing whatever district or whatever place that you've been elected to represent. And I think there's certainly politicians that do that, especially on a local level. And there's been some people at the local level that have been the opposite party that I haven't had any issues with. And I mean, I don't hate Republicans just because I'm a registered Democrat, and I don't necessarily love Democrats because I'm a registered Democrat. I explained the reasoning. I mean, my dad was a New Deal Democrat. I philosophically am aligned with much of what the Democratic Party stands for, but it's just, I said, it's so weird that the game that you have to play to get elected is still based on that kind of, it's almost like the equivalent of a guy who likes one football team or the other. Anything. I remember when Tom Brady, for example, was caught up in that scandal where the footballs were slightly deflated, and your opinion on it pretty much depended on whether you were a New England Patriots fan or not. Now, as a Buffalo Bills fan living in Western New York, of course, Tom Brady's a cheater. But that opinion's kind of jaded, as is the opinion of many of these people in New England who are like, oh, he would never do that. This is just overblown, and people just hate him because he's such a great quarterback. And really, the truth lies somewhere in the middle there. But that again, that's how it is with politics. It's so weird that we have just become so polarized as a nation that you do feel like you're a traitor if you don't cater to one party or the other. And I mean, idealistically, when I ran the first time, I thought to myself, I do want to appeal to Republicans because they will judge me for the individual that I am, not for the party that I belong to. And it sounds great. It sounds great on paper. And I'm one of those, and I'm one of those people that being a lifelong registered Democrat, I'll say, I voted for Republicans. But the only reason I say that is because I really don't vote for them often. Because I'm somewhat conditioned to vote for Democrats as well. Because I always give them the benefit of the doubt over anyone from the Republican Party. I don't know if I'm untypical or not. As far as how independents think, I can't give you any kind of statistical data. I will just tell you from personal experience, especially in the place where I campaigned, is that there were plenty of people that were what we called blanks. They weren't registered for any party at all. That in reality were in their mind either a Democrat or Republican. And even maybe if they weren't a Republican, they really hated Democrats. Or if they weren't registered as a Democrat, they really hated Republicans. So there's again kind of this mythos that in the middle there's these people that don't really align with a particular party. But I think if you asked them, they'd say, yeah, I'm going to vote for a particular party or another party, but they're just not registered for one or the other. And I don't fault people that do that. I mean, I get it. I mean, in some ways, I've contemplated not registering for a party and just being a blank. But then I think to myself, well, then I don't get to participate in any primary processes. And I kind of want to be part of the primaries. Because truth be told, I've never voted for the winning presidential candidate in my party at the primary level. So I don't know. I don't know what that means. So if you're running for president of the United States as a Democrat and you want to win, make sure you don't get my vote as a Democrat if you come to New York State. So, some of the other things that was really weird, like I was dealing with the local press and, I tell you, you go into these things again with blinders on in that you think, if I run for office, even if it's a local level, I'm just going to be the most principled individual, and when we're not going to run a dirty campaign. And it was interesting. It got dirty fairly quickly. I actually used to tell people. Somebody said to me, they've really tried to dig up some dirt on you, Tom, and it was all kinds of stuff. And the big thing was, that I was like a raging alcoholic and I abused drugs and, I abused my kids and all those kind of things would, I abused my ex-wife and all those kinds of things would come back to me at one point or the other. And I used to joke with people that, they've attempted to dig up a lot of dirt on me, but the reality is that the real dirt that could have damaged me, they never really found it. It was so, I don't know. I'm like, man, how can I respect anybody that can't find the real dirt on me? Because it's out there, folks. We all have skeletons in our closet. And that's not to say that I'm, like a serial killer or anything horrible, but there certainly was some things that had happened in my past that were matter of public record that could have been damaging. And with a little bit of digging, they probably could have found it, but they never did. So instead, they manufactured some stuff. And then I had a situation, kind of going back to that chief administrative officer, where I had applied for a position as a teacher at the local school district. And there were some things that went on. And I mean, that story would take up a whole podcast. I'll probably, I don't know, when I run out of topics, I'll get to it. It's really a bit of a boring story, but the condensed version is that I'd filed a complaint with the EEOC, and it never went anywhere. They did the investigation process. I was given what's called a letter that was a right to sue. So if I wanted to pursue legal action against the school district, I could have done that. But I didn't, because I just didn't, it was one of those situations where I just wanted to just be over it. And I was having a difficult time finding a job. Some things had gotten back to me. I filed a complaint with the EEOC. Miracle upon all miracles, I wind up getting a job because, whatever smear campaign was against me, I assumed was shut down because they had this complaint filed against them. So problem solved. I got a job. You guys can't harm me anymore because of whatever you're saying happened, that you're mad at me about. But the superintendent her niece happened to be married to this guy. And so she leaked it to the press that I had, quote unquote, sued the school, that I filed a lawsuit against the school. And it was all nonsense. It said there was never a lawsuit. And so a local reporter called me up and he wanted to comment on the story. Because from a ethical standpoint, you can't write about a story unless somebody allows you to write. So, for instance, the fact that I filed this complaint with the EEOC was not a matter of public record. They couldn't identify me as the person. The school district was doing all kinds of things to make it known that it was me. They'd say, oh, is it this person? And, of course, all the rumors went throughout, oh, this guy tried to sue the school, this guy that's running for county legislator. And so the guy called me from the newspaper and he says, do you want to comment on this? I said, listen, dude, I don't want to comment on it. I said, everybody knows it's me. And I don't want to make matters worse than they already are. I just want this whole thing to go away. So he says to me, he's like, well, listen, if you comment on this, then it will make you look like you're forceful. You can defend yourself against these rumors. I said, yeah, well, whatever. So the guy appealed to my ego, and he said, well, this will get the real story out. People will get the real story out. So sure, they get quotes from me, but then they get more quotes from the superintendent of the school and then my opponent. So by the time this thing runs, my campaign manager, this guy Scott, who was the one I spoke about originally, who was one of originally convincing me to run for office, he had warned me. He's like, don't talk to the press. Don't give these guys anything. They know where their bread's buttered. And so, the story ran. It was pretty much a hit piece. And I learned a very, very, very valuable lesson. Don't trust the media. That's ironic because I write for a newspaper and have for 13 or 14 years. And, honestly, I'm friendly with the guy now. I mean, I didn't speak to him for, 2 or 3 years and really just hated him with every ounce of my being. But was able to get past that at some point. But, it's straight. And then at the time, as I mentioned, I was writing an op-ed column for a competing paper the competing paper that this guy was working for. And my opponent was trying to get my column ended because they thought it was unfair that I was getting all this press. And so they were leaning on my newspaper editor. And I was like, look, dude, this is my secondary source of income. I mean, I'm not going to give it up just because I'm running for office. I mean, it's not even fair. And the editor that I had early on, he was pretty thick-skinned, and he said, no, that's fine. You can continue to write your op-ed. And then later on, by the time I got to the third campaign, they had really continued to put the pressure on it to the point where the county threatened through backdoor channels to not run any legal notices in the newspaper that I wrote for if they continued to publish my columns. And they said, look, it's extortion, but you know what? We'll make a deal. He just won't write about any issues related to the campaign, but he can still write his weekly column. I mean, this is the kind of garbage that goes on behind the scenes in these local elections. So, man, it's like, it's funny. You just even talking about it's hard at times because again, you go into these situations thinking that, you know, you're going to run this above board campaign, that your opponent is going to do the same thing. But, you know, I'm not saying that maybe my particular race was typical of other races, but it sure seems that way because even at the national level and all these federally elected positions now, everybody just seems to be getting so nasty. Like, it's not even, you get to the point where you're playing chess and just trying to out-manipulate your opponent during the campaign process. And what you lose in that is the ability to connect with the voter and even understand what they want and what the expectation is out of you as the public servant. So on some level, it's interesting because I look back and I'm glad for the experience because I met some people through it. I learned a lot about the political process. I've, as a high school teacher, taught participation in government, so I have a perspective that I wouldn't have had I not run for office. But, you know, as I've witnessed over the years, this division, it's just insane. It's scary. And even just the inability to discuss politics with people that have differing opinions, it's gotten completely out of hand. My next door neighbor growing up, I'll mention his name. I don't know if he'll ever listen. I'd be an honor if he did. Kid named Dan Clark. Dan was a year older than me. His dad was a Nixon Republican. My dad was a Franklin Delano Roosevelt New Deal Democrat. And we would have playful discussions on our front yard about politics, pretty much driven by our parents. So we were kind of debating politics to our parents. It never got nasty. My next door neighbor, his dad was just a great dude all the way around. We had a different political opinion. Who cares? Great guy. Dan Clark, to this day, he's a hardcore Republican. He posts things on social media that I don't agree with in the least as far as his political opinion. As a human being, good father, good husband, who cares what his political persuasion is? As long as it's not openly if it's racist or homophobic or any of those types of things, I don't have any tolerance for that. Nobody should. I mean, we shouldn't tolerate hate, but we can certainly tolerate differences of opinion. And it's funny, even as the podcast, as I was starting out, I was thinking to myself, well, gosh, if I mention the fact that I'm a Democrat, there'll probably be people that'll just turn off the episode right there. Because I'm not going to listen to a Democrat. And it's sad because that does not define who I am. It's just my political persuasion. And, I'll close with, if you do decide to run for office, and then this is a cautionary tale for anybody that decides to run for office on a local level in a competitive position, because we've gotten to the point where so many local level office elections are just they're unopposed. You have a party that can finesse things so that they just don't even have competition, and not having competition to me is just horrible. We should all have a choice. But, you can make a change if you bring up issues that force your opponent who is elected to make that change. So you can do some good, but you also have to kind of look at what toll it could possibly have on you as a human being, what it does to your soul, whether it makes you jaded. If you can get through the process without coming out the other end as bitter. And, I'll tell you, after running for office 3 times, there was a period of time where I was very bitter and very disillusioned with the whole political process. And, even this podcast is in some way working through some of that and even kind of stirring up some of those emotions. But, again, I think that we certainly have hope as a nation that we can. And I think people are starting to become aware of the dangers of the two-party system. But I don't think that necessarily means that we have to eliminate both parties. I think what we have to do is we really have to get to the point where we hold the politicians, the people that are running for office, we hold them to a higher standard, to the point where at least they're civil to each other. That we don't honor the mudslinging or the just the angry back and forth. The things that really don't have anything to do with a person's ability to be a good representative. And the reality is that politicians really, to me, in my mind, they fall into two categories. They're either really good campaigners or they're really good leaders. And it's a rare person that you find that's both. So sometimes, we elect people because they are excellent campaigners, because they have great campaign strategists, and whether they're great campaigners because they're morally good or because they're strategically good, either way. To me, it's a different skill set, because once they get into office, then it becomes all about continuing to get reelected, which can be good because if they're worried about what their constituents are thinking, then they're going to represent them properly. But I think ultimately, we have to embrace and appreciate politicians that do it for the right reason, and not only do it for the right reason, but do it in the right way. Because we're always surprised at all these political scandals and everything like that, but we vote for these people because they're kind of ruthless, and because we somehow see that the person that's our person, our guy or our gal or whatever, that, hey man, that's my person, so I'm going to represent him, and it doesn't matter. It's that Tom Brady mentality, like, well, what do you mean he cheated? He's the greatest quarterback ever. If he had to cheat a little bit, that's fine, because look at the results. The results are he's got all these Super Bowl wins. And don't get me wrong, folks, Tom Brady's greatest quarterback in the history of the game. But I use that example as just a way to kind of accentuate people's view on that particular incident. And he paid his time for it. He was suspended for a period of time. And honestly, I don't think the whole deflating the balls a little bit was a huge deal. Unless, of course, you don't like the Patriots. But either way, I guess again, to kind of sum it up, it all goes back to everything, which is kind of the overarching theme of the Bagel Logic podcast. It's just treating each other better, self-awareness, and looking at and rewarding people and individuals who do the right thing for the right reasons, and not just because they're a member of our political party or like our favorite football team. All right. Well, hey, that was a lot. I don't know. Hopefully you enjoyed it. So we've got some other topics coming up pretty soon. I promise at some point I will have a guest, because, talking for 45 minutes at a clip is not always easy. Well, it really doesn't come all that hard to me. But hope you enjoy this episode. Appreciate it if you subscribe and share and do all that kind of stuff. We're on pretty much every podcast platform in the known universe, so there's no reason for you not to be able to find us. Again, thank you from me to you, and I look forward to growing together and continuing to grow this podcast. Thanks so much.